Check this.
Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this video is going to be on wealth inequality, and it's actually a response video to Noam Chomsky's video that he made about wealth inequality and how it's super evil and how some of the problems within our society that there's more and more wealth inequality and how that's causing great social decay. So my video will be, I give 4 arguments to why wealth inequality is not necessarily the evil that it might seem to be. The first is that often when people think of wealth inequality, they think of it as just the rich stealing from the poor. They think of it as a zero-sum game, that basically the rich must get rich by taking it from somebody else. This is not really how capitalism works. When somebody creates something new, like an iPhone, well, that's a new product that didn't exist before. And that product goes to market and people will buy it. And if people like that product, they'll buy it a lot and the company will become fabulously wealthy. Now, in the process of that, it's not that money was stolen from people because they gave a real product. They gave the iPhone as a product to people. And people voluntarily gave their money for that product. And that's how capitalism works. It's not through stealing, it's through providing a product or service that people want. So with capitalism, it's always a volunteer exchange of money for a product or service. That's really important to understand, that the wealth that's generated from capitalism isn't created by stealing. There's no money that's been stolen from anyone. So the second component of my argument against wealth inequality and the evils of it would be that, well, now these wealthy people have all this money, right? And people imagine the Scrooge McDuck. Whenever they think, I always imagine Scrooge McDuck and he's swimming in his pools of money. And that's usually what people think of when they think of these rich people with lots of money. They think of them just having just big piles of cash lying around and they're just sitting on it or doing whatever. That's not really how capitalism works. Often what will happen is most of the money that companies have is actually tied up within the share value of the company, within the intrinsic value of that company. So most of the money that people have is not really tangible. It's really tied up inside their own companies. But also what they'll do with any money that they have is they'll use that money to invest. Often they'll buy other companies or they'll invest and buy shares of other companies. And that money is used by companies to fund development, to hire more people. So money is being used in a way that kind of creates jobs. It creates opportunities for other people. So the rich are not just sitting on their money, they're actually using it to make them richer, because when you invest in something, you get a return on that investment, and that can generate more wealth. But in the process of generating that more wealth, they are investing and they're helping businesses grow, which helps people who work for those businesses have a job, and it helps our society because more things are being able to be produced and more people can get products at a cheaper rate because, you know, it's just the way the system works. The capitalist system, generally prices will fall and we'll have more accessibility to more goods because there's just more production. So it's all funded by the wealth that the system generates, which is really great. So wealth inequality often will create these situations where there will be a huge amount of wealth inside of like an individual or a family or whatever, and that money goes back into the system through investment, through many different ways. Another method that is really interesting with a lot of these super wealthy people is the Carnegie effect. And I call it the Carnegie effect. It could be the Rockefeller effect as well, where you get these super wealthy people. And what they'll do is they'll fund things like buildings, or like Carnegie funded the Carnegie Hall. So he used the money to not only to help his wealth grow, but he helped society in giving back to the arts basically, and helping add value to his society, which is a great thing. So often what will happen is if these wealthy people kind of pool their money, well, the money gets used for either investment or for charity or for something. It's not just that they sit on it. So no Scrooge McDucks here. My third point is that there's an assumption that if you gave this huge amount of money and you distributed it amongst all the poor, that somehow the poor would be better off and would be able to handle and use that money in a better way. And I was actually at a dinner party just recently, and the guy that I was talking to at the dinner party, we were talking about wealth inequality and stuff. It was kind of very relevant to this. And he asked me, which would be better? If I gave you $5, that's just a number, or if I gave $1 to each of the people at the table. So instead of giving one person a whole bunch of money, give it to $1 and divide it amongst all the people where they each get equal amounts of money. And you think, wow, that's fair. Everybody gets equal amounts of money. But really it's this question about how would the poor use the money if you equally distributed it amongst them? And I said to him, and he was very taken aback by it, that I said, it'd be better if you gave me the full money, and not just for me, but for everybody at the table, if you gave me all the money. And it's not because I am greedy and I just want all the money. It's because what would happen is I'm an entrepreneur. I would take that $5 and I would invest it in my company. Maybe hire somebody. We're using the example of $5, but think of the bigger numbers, like millions of dollars. Well, I would take that money and invest it in my company. And if you gave it to the other people, if you divided it amongst other people, it's a small amount each that they would have, and they would probably not use it the most efficient way. They wouldn't use it to create more wealth for everybody. Whereas an entrepreneur would. Most entrepreneurs would use it to create more jobs, more opportunities. Often, the thing that people don't understand is there's usually a reason why people are poor. And it can be education, it can be like criminal background, it can be many different things. But one of the biggest reasons is just the inability to make good decisions. And that's why they have all those other things. So usually somebody that doesn't make good decisions about being, avoiding crime, well, they're the kind of people that just don't make good decisions altogether. And they'll be not such great financial people. So if you give them money, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll use it wisely. You don't necessarily want to give somebody who doesn't really understand the value of money, more money. A good example of this is I heard some statistic. It was like 50% or really high percentage of people that win the lottery will be bankrupt within 3 years. And the reason that happens is when you give a large sum of money to people that are not used to money and don't have real sense of how to manage money, often what will happen is they'll just waste it. They won't really use it in a productive way. Whereas if you give money, a large sum of money to people who understand money, like entrepreneurs, business owners, they will know how to use the money to best generate more money. See, the goal with an entrepreneur is always to make more money. So you don't want to lose money. You don't want to waste money. You use it in an efficient way. So remember, that whole process of making more money leads to more jobs. It leads to more things being contributed to our society. So ultimately, it's a better thing than just giving it to somebody who has no clue. That's just going to waste the money. Okay? So the fourth one, my fourth point that I'd like to mention about wealth inequality is people always look at the disparity. That if there's super wealthy people, and then everyone compared to them is super poor, that's the big thing you have to understand, that compared to them, there's a huge disparity. That the wealthy might have most of the money, like 99% of the money, and the rest of the people have 1%. Well, that seems really bad, and I wouldn't recommend that, actually, but there's an assumption there that the greater the disparity, the worse off those poor people are. And the funny thing is, that's not actually the case. If you look at countries like Venezuela, they actually have very little wealth inequality, but everybody's equally poor. Well, in the United States, they actually have a fairly high level of wealth inequality, but the poor are better off than they are in Venezuela, and they're better off than most of the world. And the point is, we shouldn't look at how much disparity there is. We should look at the conditions that the poorest people within that society are living in. And if you look at the United States or Canada or any of these Western countries where there's maybe a large amount of disparity, the poor are actually better off in that situation. So wealth inequality doesn't necessarily mean that the poorest are worse off for the experience. And that's a really important thing to understand. Most people miss that point. And it's a super important one to understand, that it doesn't really matter how much wealth inequality there is if the poorest of the people in that society are better off. So usually that's what I look at when I say, hey, there's a problem here or not. I look at how well are the poorest people doing. And it doesn't really matter how rich the rich are. Often when people complain about wealth inequality, they're more jealous of the rich than actually wanting to help the poorest people within society. So wealth inequality, the people that advocate about, breaking down wealth inequality or fighting against wealth inequality are the same people that advocate for a society like Venezuela, where basically everybody's poor equally. And we don't want that. I'd rather people be super rich and everybody else being a little bit better off than the state that everyone's equal but equally poor. So this has been Socially Triggered. I hope you enjoyed this video. And please like, comment, and subscribe, and leave some feedback for me. Thank you. Bye.
Check this.